I'm Teresa Biber-Lamonti, creator of the Biber Protocol. You know, a lot of people ask me, how did you come about with this, Teresa? How did it all happen? Well, I'll be happy to tell you the story. It was the year 1997, and I was in my first year as a speech-language pathologist. Now, I worked in a subacute rehab hospital where all the patients are receiving OT, at least 2 out of the 3 therapies, OT, PT, speech. And there was a master schedule provided each day so that if your patient didn't show up on time, you knew where to go to find them. And on this particular day, I was waiting for my 10 a.m. patient, and we'll call her Mrs. J, who had upper and lower extremity hemiparesis, dysarthria, and dysphagia due to stroke. So I walked into the OT gym to locate her and saw her sitting at a table with the occupational therapist. She had 2 large pads on her arm. And I watched in amazement as I saw her paralyzed arm move. And not just the arm, the fingers too. I was in complete, utter disbelief. How do you get a paralyzed arm to move? How does that work? She said, well, it's electrical stimulation. I'm like, well, how does that happen? Use electrical impulses to stimulate a nerve to elicit a muscle contraction. I proceeded with a litany of questions, which she kindly answered. And then I said, so wait a minute, why can't we do that for our patients with dysphagia or facial paralysis? Well, she then looked at me like I had 2 heads. Well, no one's ever done that. You can't do that. Can't put electrodes on the neck. So I went down to the physical therapy department and got the same response. But it didn't seem like a very valid response, I thought. Just because no one has ever done it doesn't mean it can't be done or it shouldn't be done. And if it works for the skeletal muscles of the upper or lower extremities, why wouldn't it work for the skeletal muscles of the laryngeal elevators or the skeletal muscles of the face? I wasn't going to just stop thinking and learning about a potential treatment that could help my patients just because somebody said you can't do that. And in all honesty, that probably motivated me a little bit more. Saying you can't do that without a reasonable, logical, scientific explanation, that's just a challenge to me. I had patients who were suffering, and I wanted to make sure I had access to any treatment that was going to help them recover better. So, started my journey. First, reading everything I could find about electrical stimulation. Now, mind you, this is 1997. The internet was really just out a few years. A lot of people didn't have it in their houses. And so you go to the library, have to drive down there while it's open, going through all the card catalogs, then finding the physical research papers, then back to the journals where they're printed in these big giant binders, where then you had to photocopy and you tried to stick them on top of the photocopier and the margins were off, and it was a lot of work, but you did it because that's the way you did things. And then you'd get the photocopy of the article, you'd highlight it, then you potentially put it down on note cards. So then, as I'm going through and religiously just trying to find anything I can find with regards to electrical stimulation and swallowing, I found the first article. And guess what? It was dated in 1893. Frederick Rethie first evoked the swallow of a rabbit using electrical stimulation. I'm not crazy, I thought. And then I went on to find numerous more articles from the 60s and the 70s, and finally, the seminal article by George Larson in 1973. So here I had all this evidence that electrical stimulation for swallowing had benefit, but no one is doing it. Why? What happened? I thought, well, I am a new clinician and I'm still learning how to diagnose and treat dysphagia, so let me make sure I get a good handle on this, and once I do, I am definitely revisiting this idea. So fast forward to 1999. I'm now working at the Cleveland Clinic, And I approached the subject with my mentor and boss. She says, sounds interesting, let's call in a meeting with otolaryngology and physical therapy. So we all sat down and I presented my idea. They asked a few questions, we came up with a protocol, and then we established how we could proceed. So for the next 2 years, I saw every swallowing patient in the physical therapy gym under the supervision of 3 different physical therapists, all highly skilled in NMES. It was a life-changing experience, to say the least, as I observed not only electrical stimulation as I was using it myself, but all of the equipment, modalities, and measurement tools and manual techniques that the physical therapist had, that they employed to help their patients recover. And as I'm observing and asking and learning, I'm soaking it all in and asking them to teach me and show me. It seemed a bit ridiculous to me that I had been trained to sit across from a patient at a desk and go through a worksheet of exercises, and yet there's all these treatment interventions that are commonly used by the physical therapist and the occupational therapist that clearly have evidence and make a difference, but we don't have access to them. They're dealing with muscles, but so are we. Why do they get all the cool toys? So not only did I become proficient in electrotherapy, I also became cross-trained in manual techniques and other modalities. I read everything I could, including 3 textbooks back-to-back on electrotherapy. I even attended a course in electrotherapy designed for the physical therapist. My patients seemed to be responding very well, and the referring doctors were inquiring more and more about what exactly are you doing with the patients, because they could see a difference as their patients had a much quicker and better outcome. They were asking me to see inpatients and actually holding off on placing a feeding tube in some patients, waiting to see if I could expedite recovery and avoid placement altogether. They asked me to go to the nursing homes and train the staff there so the treatment I started in the hospital could continue in their facilities. I had a new surge of outpatient referrals as well. Now, interesting thing, it just so happened that at the same time we were contacted by ASHA, the American Speech and Hearing Association, to be part of the NAHMS project. NAHMS, which stands for National Outcome Measurement System, was a pilot program that ASHA was rolling out to establish standardized outcome measures using a 7-point scale for all the different disorders we treat. The purpose was to provide solid evidence to the payer sources that therapy indeed can make a difference. So we went through the training and the certification to become some of the first NAHMS evaluators, and then proceeded to report our outcome data to the National ASHA database. As a result, we received these beautifully bound reports with charts and graphs comparing our outcomes to similar other facilities in our immediate region, state, and nationwide. What we discovered was that my outcomes in dysphagia were significantly higher than anywhere else in the US, 2.5 points higher. I think it was pretty safe to say that at that time in the United States, no one else on that NAHMS project was using electrical stimulation for dysphagia. Before I knew it, the phone was literally ringing off the hook from medical facilities all over the country, wondering what was I doing that was different. So I told them about NMES, and the next thing I know, I was teaching the very first course ever held in the United States on NMES for dysphagia by popular demand as part of the Arizona Speech and Hearing Association annual meeting. I never advertised. There's no social media. I didn't have a web page. It was all word of mouth. Within a year, I was teaching courses every month, sometimes every week, traveling all over the United States. Since then, I've expanded to Asia, Latin America, and Europe. I've been a consultant in an NIH-funded trial presented at Dysphagia Research Society, and I'm currently working on a state-of-the-art scoping review and position paper with some of the world's leading experts in electrotherapy. 3 devices have been based on my protocol and have been cleared by the FDA, with a 4th one in the works. I have trained tens of thousands of clinicians, hundreds of patients all over the world, with over millions of treatments performed without any adverse effects and consistently positive outcomes. NMES, when applied properly to the appropriate candidate, has tremendous physiological and functional benefits. Better than that, it has a significant impact we can have on improving the quality of life and preventing aspiration for our patients. Now, there's always going to be obstructionists out there, the naysayers who seem to relish the negative and are always going to find a way to prove that something doesn't work. But the science is behind me, and the outcomes speak for themselves. I have been threatened and sued and slandered by those motivated by ego and greed or ulterior motive. But you can't stop somebody who's doing something that's having such a positive benefit for so many people. And again, if I were a researcher, maybe I should focus on developing something that will help our patients rather than proving what somebody else didn't. NMES works if you understand it and you use it correctly. In the meantime, our patients should have access as standard of care for NMES for dysphagia treatment. So that's my story, and here I am many years later, 20 plus years later, still teaching, still sharing, patients still getting better, and I'm still very happy to tell you that NMES works. There's more than enough evidence to support it, and it will substantially improve your patients' outcomes when applied and utilized correctly. Thanks for listening.